Hi, my name is Denise Delgado Rivera,
And I'm Marisol Soto.
and Melanie Martinez is also in our group. We're doing Chapter 3 Perception, and we're focusing on two concepts perception process and perception checking.
Perception is everything to humans. There is not one thing that does not get perceived. Perception of things, however, varies from person to person, which is why it is difficult to argue with that how one perceives something is right or wrong. Almost everything humans do or see on a day-to-day basis can be perceived and will always be perceived differently by different people. Due to the fact that everyone perceives things differently is why it's so important to communicate clearly. You don't want to have a 10-minute conversation with someone and they understand a completely different thing than what you are trying to get across. Agenda. Perception process involves selecting, organizing, and interpreting information. Perception checking involves sharing one's perception about a behavior as a way to communicate or clarify the interpretation.
Perception process. In the perception process, one selects, organizes, and interprets information by perceiving select stimuli to pass through one's perceptual filters. Once this occurs, the information is then organized into existing structures and patterns, which will then be interpreted through past experiences. Selecting information is the first process. We tend to focus on salient information, which varies on visual stimulation needs, interests, and expectations. Organizing information is the second process. We sort things into pattern by using proximity, similarity, and differences. But these judgments are not natural. Interpreting information is the last process. This is where we assign meaning to our experiences using mental structures called schema. Interpretation is the process of explaining and evaluating what you have been selected or organized. Because people are individuals, they are unlikely to have to select the same stimuli and organize them in the same way.
In the video, a man perceives his coworker is frustrated and angry. He asks to see if he's okay, and his coworker responds that with yes, he just has a stomach ache. He realizes that he was wrong and we should always be careful with how we perceive. He is doing the perception process. He selects, organizes, and interprets, selects his coworker's facial expression, organizes it as a frustration and anger, and interprets it as he's angry with his life. We attach meaning using personal experiences, but since everyone is different, it means our perception is not always true.
We've got a quick question for you about these two squares. True or false? This top one here is a darker gray than the bottom one. Pretty obvious, right? Well, maybe not, because the answer is actually false. Believe it or not, they are exactly the same color.
Okay, come on over. We're gonna do a test.
Bo's going to prove to you and a group of volunteers that the two squares are the same color gray.
When you open your eyes, right, first time in the morning, say, Do you think you see the world as it really is?
I say yes.
Yeah. You see it? Oh, you're
See and
definitely.
believe it.
That depends if I'm wearing my glasses or not. Yes.
Yes. Yes? Yeah. I mean, why not? All right. Well, look at this cube here. What if I told you that those two surfaces are exactly the same? Would you believe me?
I would.
Okay. Come on up. Okay.
Bo has attached a gray swatch to one of the surfaces to allow you and the volunteers to test this one out for yourselves.
Take that dot and move that nice up here. Right there.
Oh my God. No way. Look again.
It's crazy.
You're my
We've got a quick question for you about these two.
This is a great example of perception process and show how people can perceive things differently. People do perceive the same situation differently because they might focus on select different things to focus their attention on in a situation. And since our brains function on what is being focused, we are perceiving things differently. This is from a popular show called Brain Games, and it gives great examples. As you can see, the people in the video are really stunned, and their perception process is focusing on how it's not the same, but it actually is.
Perception checking. We as humans are constantly thinking why a person acts the way they do. In psychology, these are called attributions. We attribute behavior with specific motivations. An example of that would be, my daughter ran to her dad and not me like she usually does. She must not like me anymore. This is called making an assumption about others. The problem with that is that we're often wrong because we're simply guessing what the other person is thinking and we never actually know what's going on in their head. It's important to use perception checking when discussing things with the other person. You don't want to have a hostile tone with them. An example of that would be, what is your issue? Why did you run to your dad and not me? That can go off the wrong way and they become aggravated or withstanding with you. When we're asking why they did what they did, we don't want to ambush them, but rather use perception checking and get the actual answer to our question. This video explains perception checking really well. It's a really useful process that we can help the way that we perceive others or situations. By using these steps, we will check our perception and benefit our and everyone's life. Perception checking has 3 steps. The first step being describing the behavior or situation without evaluating or judging. The second step is thinking of possible interpretations of the behavior and being aware of attributions and other influences on the perception process. And the last step, verify what happened and ask for clarification from the other perspective. Also be aware that the other person likely experienced the event differently than you.
Perception Checking by Shivani Williams and Michelle Cauchin. Okay, example 1. Michelle, you haven't really been responding to the last couple of phone calls I've made to you or the voicemail I've left. Behavior. I wasn't sure if you were avoiding me for some reason, first interpretation, or perhaps you've been tied up with school and work. Second interpretation. Is anything the matter? Request for clarification. Example 2.
Shivani, I've noticed that every time I want to start our project, you seem to brush me off or give me an excuse as to why you can't meet up. Behavior. I wasn't sure if you didn't want to work with me as your partner, first interpretation, or if you just been tied up with your other classes, second interpretation. How do you feel? Request for clarification.
The quiz. What are 3 different ways that are used when sorting things into patterns? Question 2. What are 3 steps in the perception process? Question 3. True or false? Judgment placed on various patterns or categories are natural. Question 4. What is the first part of perception process? Question 5. What is the word that is used in psychology for when we assign behavior with specific motivations? Conclusion. Perception process is human nature. We perceive everything and everyone. The way you see something can be completely opposite of what the next person sees. Perception can become an issue when we are communicating with others. That's why it's so important to use perception process and perception checking. The 3 steps of perception process include selecting information, organizing information, and interpreting information. And the 3 steps of perception checking are describing the behavior, possible interpretations, and verify what actually happened. We don't want our relationship with people to take a toll simply because we're perceiving things differently and we lack the proper communication. Thank you. Oh, and these are our research references, the videos that we used. Perception animation, brain games, perception, explaining the perceptual process, and number 1, perception checking. And here are our research references and reliable sources. Why do people perceive things differently? Publisher, A removed at request of original, 2021, 2.1 perception process. Stages of the perception process, perception and how people perceive the same thing differently. And here are our quiz answers. Number 1 was proximity, similarity, and difference. Question 2 was select, organize, and interpret. Question 3 was false. Question 4 was selecting. And question 5 was attributions. Okay, thank you.